This is Mark Depew. I'm with Doug Parrett for our second part of our interview today. And Doug, what we'd like to talk in this portion is find a lot more about the University of Illinois and especially the College of Agriculture. So put you on the spot here a little bit and tell us a little bit about how the College of Agriculture and the university itself got started in the first place.
Well, the university, they use the year 1867 as the beginning of the university and it's a land-grant university. And for people that might not know, land-grant universities there's 26 of them, 23 or 26 of them throughout the country. But they were established federally as institutions to take technology back to the people. And that technology was through schools of engineering, the other general education, and also agriculture. And so the land-grant schools have always had a mission in discovery science and improvement in as far as agriculture is concerned.
The land grant suggests the way that they initially financed it?
It's absolutely with the federal funding and stuff like that. In some cases it is actually donated land or purchased land for the additional parts to the university. In most cases it was just a federal funding line of budgetary support to establish those things. And agriculture at the University of Illinois began in the late 1800s. About 1886, a College of Agriculture was actually established. The original university, if you'd go down to the quad, there's a hall named Davenport Hall, after Davenport, who was the first dean of the College of Agriculture. And it was one of the first, half a dozen buildings at the University of Illinois. The turn of the century is when most of the college developed as far as individual departments. Animal husbandry, which has evolved in animal sciences, which I am now, but animal husbandry was one of the early departments along with a crops division, crop production, crop science division. And so all those occurred, and then it evolved to what we would know as home economics, home and family development as far as nutrition, economics, and foods and processing. So originally there was crops, animals, and then home development were the original parts of the College of Agriculture. I can take you through exactly like animal sciences. We were animal husbandry, and then in 1902 we split off to be animal husbandry and dairy husbandry, because dairying, most farms had dairy animals too, so we had two separate divisions. Then they evolved to about the 1920s, and in the 1920s a division broke off as far as pathological and veterinary sciences, which become the veterinary school in about 1940, and then we had animal husbandry and dairy husbandry, which evolved to animal sciences and dairy sciences. And then we merged those departments about 25 years ago, and they became one department of animal sciences. So our animal sciences department includes all of the food animals, including dairy, so beef, swine, sheep, poultry, and dairy, and horses. And then also our department of animal sciences had the first and now has the largest companion animal department. So it's a food animal department and also companion animal.
But not veterinary science?
But not veterinary medicine. Veterinary medicine in the 40s became a separate college. And so actually animal sciences deals with the genetics, the nutrition, the management of raising animals, and veterinary medicine deals with the health issues. Now, it's only natural the two are very related. I mean, because problems from illness or health problems oftentimes can be related to production problems. But we evolved basically as the department that did everything to raise animals more efficiently and end up with better food products, and then veterinary medicine was different.
Can you give us a sense, when the college was first founded, when the university was first founded, how much of its identity and the atmosphere was dictated by the College of Agriculture or the engineering school, and how that has evolved over time as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. But I think it kind of follows the timeline of how many people are involved in agriculture. You would know the statistics better than I do, but the amount of our population involved in production agriculture at the turn of the century was probably 40% or 50%. Somewhere around half our population was actively involved. And now we're down to 2 or 3%. And so if you look at the colleges at the University of Illinois, the agricultural college was the primary college at the campus at the University of Illinois. Now, probably number of students wasn't a lot different than just regular general education students, but engineering would have been smaller. Now the roles are reversed. Engineering school has over like 6,000 students, and our College of Agriculture has about 2,500 students on a campus where there are 30,000 undergraduate students. So the College of Agriculture is about 10% of the university, where initially it was half. Now we need to stop, Mark. We need to talk about, I'm using the term College of Agriculture. And about 12 years ago, we changed from the College of Agriculture to the College of ACES, a nice acronym. And ACES stands for Agriculture, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences. Now, why did we make change? It was agonizing for some of our older alums, particularly those deeply involved in production agriculture, to change the name to something different because of all the history and all the tradition with it. But actually the change was evoked because if we think about who are we dealing with now, we talked about politicians and budgetary issues. We talked about who are our consumers in the state of Illinois now, who are the people we're working with. And it's become science-based and not necessarily just production-based. So we have agriculture, consumer, and environmental sciences. And I think we were visiting earlier, we have 7 departments in our college now. We have animal sciences, then we have crop sciences, so 2 of the basic core departments are there. We also have an ag economics department. It's agriculture consumer economics. And animal sciences and ag economics are actually the 2 largest departments in the college. Then we have a department, we said crop science, natural resources and environmental studies, foods and nutrition, human and community development, and ag and bioengineering. So we have 7 departments in there that kind of take the breadth of everything that you think about involved with agriculture, how it's branched off into the sciences affecting humans and ag products.
The one that you mentioned, human and community involvement?
Human and community development. It would be similar when we think about when many people my generation and older were growing up. We had a home economics class in high school, and they would teach you basic bookkeeping, cooking skills, and just managing a home and raising a family. And human community development, the people in that department would probably not want me to describe it with that comparison, but it still deals with human issues and development. And when we talk about food science, we're talking about all the things as far as nutritional preparation of food. We're in an age where we're looking for foods to help provide health to the human population. So we look at all those things, processing and development of foods that benefit society. Human development and family issues are still important. Where we used to think about at the turn of the century, cooking and canning of vegetables, now we think about how do you raise a family and avoid drug issues. How do you finance economics of a home when you're on a limited budget? What do you do with children who spend all their time playing video games? And so we have issues like that fit our society. They're quite different than they were then. But the topic human, family, community development are still big issues. A lot of small business support. A totally different issue that our college spends a lot of time on are what's happening to rural communities. The populations have certainly left. A lot of businesses have disappeared, and how do these rural communities actually sustain themselves? And we put a lot of energy into devoting to studying and development of strategies to maintain themselves.
We've discovered doing a lot of these interviews the emotional impact that school consolidations have in some of these smaller communities as well. That's just an example, I would think.
Exactly.
How about the I'm probably going to get this wrong, ag marketing or ag economics?
Ag and consumer economics. ACE is the acronym for that.
But one of the subcategories, one of the subdepartments was dealing with economics?
Yes. Actually, each of our departments has what we call different concentration areas. Now, for animal science, we would have preparing to go to veterinary medicine, or to graduate school. We would have something that's applied animal production. We have another concentration area that's animal processing and food and product development. So We have those areas, and each of them have a general curriculum and then more specific work. Now, ag economics, they have different areas too, and I'm not sure of these all exactly, but they have marketing options. Whether you want to become a CPA, they have joint business school development. They have a lot of strategies as far as business development, whether it's an ag business or just general businesses.
And that suggests that if you're going to be a successful farmer today or involved in agribusiness someplace, you can't just understand the animal science end of things. You have to understand the marketing part as well.
A good example of that is we have a greatly reduced population of students in animal science that actually come from a farm where they raised animals. Now that may sound odd. Let me back up. When I started in Animal Science 100 as a student, 80% of the students in the class were male, and 80% of the students came from a farm that raised pigs, cattle, sheep, poultry, dairy cattle, horses, something like that. I just put together my survey of my class this fall. There'll be 200 students in Animal Sciences 100. 80% of them will want to be a veterinarian. Now, they won't necessarily want to be a veterinarian to work on cattle, pigs, sheep, food animals, but they had a dog, a cat, a snake, a gerbil, and they love animals. And so they think being a veterinarian and taking care of animals is a noble profession, and it is. Now, veterinary medicine is very competitive. There's only 23 schools of veterinary medicine, and only about 30 to 40 of my 200 students will actually get into a school of veterinary medicine. Now, a lot of them will go on to graduate school because they're bright students. But in this class, there's only about 15% come from farms that actually raise cattle, pigs, sheep, poultry, dairy cattle from production animals. And I always wonder, where are those students? And what's evolved, the generation of students that we have now whose family are involved in animal production, their dad and mom say, go to the University of Illinois, but become an economics major, or be a crop scientist. You know, we're mainly farmers that grow crops. Learn about herbicides and genetic hybrid seeds and remote-controlled tractors and GPS, you know, satellite-controlled application of different herbicides and fertilizers. And so learn to we can teach you about raising animals at home. Go learn the other skills that are so critical to success in farming. When I grew up, and I think of my dad, he was a marketing person, he was an economics person, he was a crops person, he was a fertilizer person. He knew a little bit about everything, and enough that he could work with different companies. He had a broad understanding. And now production agriculture has become intensely detailed from a science standpoint, that it demands too much time for any one person to understand all of it.
Tell us a little bit more about some of the other aspects that your particular department, the Ag Sciences Department, does.
Well, animal sciences, the evolution that has occurred, well, let's talk a couple of things philosophically at a university. Funding is always critical for any place to be successful. And we like to think we provide the best education that you can get at any public institution, irregardless where you are, in what department or college at the University of Illinois. But the reality is, we're a very strong basic research institution. Different than Western Illinois, Southern Illinois, Illinois State, one of our primary missions has been research. Now, all of those places do research, but they would have more faculty time committed to just teaching and applied development than as much as far as we're the largest university, and we have the capacity to do more research. When you do a research project at the university, a little over half of the money from a research grant is kept by the university to support the operating cost. If I get a $10,000 research grant, 54% goes to the university because they provide the buildings, the heats, the lights, the labs, the infrastructure for me to do research. And that's the way the system's always been. Now, it evolved from probably the 60s through the 70s and early 80s that maybe doing research here had a higher priority than, say, teaching. We were still good in teaching, but you know, it drives the system. It creates income. It allows the system to continue to operate. So we researchers have been enormously important to this university. Now, I come from a background that's primarily teaching, and I also do extension work. Part of my appointment is teaching producers, beef cattle producers out in the state and working with beef commodity groups. So I'm more on the applied side and a little less on the intensive research. But research is important. It makes the University of Illinois different. It makes us successful. And when I teach it, I can say, we discovered this last spring. We have a new technology. Our students learn on the cutting edge. And so we're a discovery science institution.
You talked about the challenges with the diminishing amount of the budget for the school coming from the state, and you mentioned grants. Where is that grant money coming from?
Well, a lot of the grant money is federal agencies, National Institute of Health, USDA. There's a myriad of federal agencies that support agriculture research. It's getting tougher, though. You know, the ag part of the budgets and federal research are getting more limited. And then there's private companies for as far as product development. For example, the seed corn companies historically have always provided funding to test and analyze different seed varieties and herbicides and pesticides. So fertilizers, seed varieties, those things. Marketing, where does marketing research come from? Again, it's different commodity groups, a Cargill, an ADM, different marketing, you know, they support different research and different products. So it's been probably equally private industry and federal and state agencies. One of the most exciting things that ever happened in Illinois was about 15 years ago, the state budgeted a appropriations called CFAR, Council for Agricultural Research, and it grew to a $15 million research pool. Now, it was a state-funded project, and it was really used for applied research, not basic science, but it was accrued all ag commodities, including grapes and different types of orchard products, anything that would benefit agriculture and have pretty immediate direct impact was funded. Not anything, but those were the types of projects that were funded. And so whether it was an educational program, the applied use of a feed for animals, some type of herbicide program on different types of orchard crops, things that would, you know, have a quick impact that maybe wouldn't be funded by private industry or federally. Now, the CFAR program, like a lot of Illinois state programs, has come under the budget crunches with lack of funds. CFAR is at about $2.5 million currently. And so we wrote about a 10-year wave of having a nice resource pool from the state of Illinois to be used, and our ag college, in combination with the ag colleges throughout the state, got a lot of projects applied that were $40,000 projects, $100,000 projects, but were studies on things that really applied and had quick effect and quick impact on agriculture products in the state of Illinois. But it went away, and so we've had to look to other resources and maybe change the types of products that we're doing.
It makes great sense that you have a lot of the agribusinesses, that many of them are based right here in Illinois, who are generous with grants as well. Does that pose some challenges to you, though?
I think the issue forever when you do research is the moral or ethical approach you do to research. And I have always been extremely impressed about the ethical approach to research at the University of Illinois. I mean, the responsibility that if you test a product, you test it fairly and give the results. Now, there are companies that will write research grants and do joint research products with us to test their products. And their product might be better or it might be worse than another product that's commercially available. Oftentimes we submit the results, and they paid dearly for these results. We aren't allowed to necessarily release that product A was terrible. Now, if product A was good, the company's going to come forth with it, and they'll be promoting it themselves. So lots of times our research, we'll publish research results and say, this product of this chemical compound of this type of nature was tested, and the results say it didn't work. We won't say that a specific company's product was tested and was bad. We allow, you know, but we'll put out in literature, say, if you use this chemical compound or this type of feedstuff or something, it doesn't work, we make that available. We won't necessarily say this product was tested by company A and we found it to not be very good, we don't necessarily take that route. But we will, this result, and if the results, sometimes we sign agreements to do research where part of the agreement is if the product turns up to be negative or not desirable, we won't put that in our publication. But we'll use their money to fund other parts of our research. And so there is some give and take like that. But the university always, a professor always has a challenge to approach it in a fair fashion. And I can't think of hardly any circumstances where that's been breached.
Well, I'm curious, though, if the grant is there, you're a research institution, you're finding out information, you're advancing knowledge. Part of that advancement of knowledge is what doesn't work, and yet there seems to be some restrictions on making that available to the rest of the research community or the rest of the scientific community.
That would be very limited. Now, I mean, I think immediately people would start thinking about health issues, human health issues, testing of drugs and things like that. And I think those products, most of the time are readily, if they fail or don't work, it's public responsibility to make that available. And it's public responsibility if a company goes forward to advance a product and they advance it with saying it does something that doesn't happen, then the university steps up or the researcher steps up and say that's not true. So there is a response. If the company said we're never going to use that product, then the results kind of just die away. So there is a checks and balances there.
Well, I want to ask you, I know you told me the story earlier about the University of Illinois and China, and I thought that was a wonderful story to illustrate the kinds of things that you get involved with.
Well, from a personal standpoint, I'm a beef cattle guy. And one of the areas we talked about judging teams in an earlier part of the interview where we go out and we look at animals, decide which one's the best. Now, at the turn of the century, the county fair and the state fair and national shows, you were a master breeder or you're a master producer. If you were judging at the Chicago International Show or the state fair, you were considered to have the eye of the master. If you could tell this bull is better than that bull and talk about why it is. And so we trained students on that. Now, it's evolved quite a bit in the last 30 years. We also have more objective performance measures. A dairy farmer, they measure the pounds of milk a cow produces, the amount of butter fat in it. And a beef producer measures rate of growth and type of meat quality. And swine producers, the fatness and the leanness of their product, and lots of measures. So when you're judging now, a lot of times on a national basis, or we're selecting breeding animals, we use a lot of objective weights and measures of performance other than just looking at the animal. So if you go to your local county fair, there'll be someone there just standing looking at them and ranking animals from best to worst based on the amount of meat and amount of fat and the way they walk and move, and there are characteristics that are important. Well, I've been fortunate to be involved in judging shows nationally and in Australia and Canada, and part of my demand to be involved in those activities is the ability to describe or give oral reasons about the different shows. I relate a quick story in Australia. I was judging over there. I was the first judge 20 years ago in Perth, Australia, in Western Australia. And usually to judge in Australia, you had to be past 60 years old, and so I would have been in my mid-30s. And they never gave reason. The judge would place them and sit down, and the next class would come in. So I'd place a group of animals, I'd get a microphone, and I'd describe the animals and give reasons why animal A beat animal B. And I noticed there were 3 or 4 people watching me. They'd stand there right by the announcer stand. And then when the animals would be walking out of the ring, they'd run to the ring, and then they'd run back to the announcer stand. And I couldn't figure out exactly what they were doing, so after about an hour, we broke for tea, and I asked them, I said, you guys keep leaving and coming back here. I'm just curious what you're doing. And they said, well, we're not used to a judge describing the animals. And sometimes you describe animals that are no longer in sight, and we couldn't believe you would do that, so we run over just to see if you were being accurate. By God, you were. You were doing a nice job, so that was kind of a compliment. But anyway, so I have some national, I've had a chance to nationally and internationally be involved in different activities as far as judging. Well, one day, about, it'd be probably 10 years ago now, we got a call in our office from a Mr. Pritzker. And if you've been in the Chicago business circles, you know the Pritzker family is one of the wealthiest families in America and probably the world. They own the Hyatt hotels, but they also own a huge international shipping business and containers on ships throughout. Well, he wanted to know if he could buy a bull from the University of Illinois. And so the call came to me, and I asked him what for, and he says, well, I want to make a gift to the Premier of China who's visiting America. And I said, why a bull? Well, he says, I'm having a hard time thinking about what gift to give the Premier. First, the Premier is controversial. Our relationships with China are strained, with Taiwan, and those issues are strained. And secondly, though, he says, I thought if I gave an agricultural gift, that would be considered okay by all the political parties in the country, and it would be politically neutral. And then that was when Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls were winning NBA championships, so he wanted to give them a bull. And he said, what do you think of my idea? And I said, well, what else do you want to accomplish? And he said, well, I'd like, you know, if you have a good bull, we could send the bull over there. We could improve the quality of beef production in China. And so I think it's a good idea. Now, later he explained that they'd agonized, he and his public relations department had agonized days and days trying to figure out what gift to present him that would be meaningful but not controversial. And so the funny part of the story, I said, well, we have bull, we have lines of cattle genetically or superior for meat quality and things like that. And I said, but you're going to have a hard time getting an animal imported into China because of disease and health restrictions of both countries. So but we did figure out a way that we could give him the ownership of the bull and then export semen so they could artificially breed cows in China and have impact on changing the cattle in China. So the story from a science and ag perspective made good sense. I do have to tell you about pricing the bull. I'm dealing with one of the richest men in the world, and he wants to know how much it's going to cost him to buy the bull. And I really didn't know. I mean, we normally at that time would sell bulls from $2,000 to $5,000. And he said, well, how much will it cost me? And I said, well, I'm not sure. He said, well, can I get the bull bought for $15,000? I said, yes. And so I thought that was a perfect transaction. Excuse me. He thought it was a fair price, and I certainly agreed. And as far as running the beef farm, they were happy because that allowed us to buy a new pickup to be used at our beef farm that next fall. But so we made a gift of the bull to the Premier of China at Pritzker's farm, which was north of Chicago. I took my son with me, took the bull up to make the presentation, and of course the security was intense. I mean, we've watched movies about the black Suburbans and the FBI and law enforcement, things like that. But about 3 miles from the property, you get stopped, you get checked, your vehicle gets checked, and I've got a trailer with a bull in it. And they're having a discussion, who's going to get inside the trailer to make sure there's not a bomb or something not safe, and with the bull in there. And they decided none of them would step inside the trailer with the bull. And I said, well, I'll go in. Yeah, but you brought the bull, that won't accomplish anything. And I said, well, I'll go in and I'll hold him while you guys look. Okay. So it was an interesting reaction. But we went to the thing, and I was assigned a secret surgeon agent. The press and the Chicago press, you can be assured, there was about 60 of them that were bussed in with a viewing stand. And I was asked to give about a 10-minute interview with them about the bull. And I thought, well, this will be exciting. So I have all the Chicago and national press there. And the first question is, tell me about the bull, which they had no idea. But by about 2 minutes, we got to, does this mean the University of Illinois has a certain public or political stance with the Republic of China? And I said, no. This means that Mr. Pritzker wanted to purchase a bull for this. Oh, does this mean that the number of Chinese students are going to increase at the University of Illinois based on this gift? I have no opinion on that. And actually, I've been prepped a little bit by the university people. But the issues were all about politics, and they didn't care much about the bull, other than they were enamored with a bull being given and the Chicago Bulls' prominence at that time. So it made for an interesting story. The Premier came and he visited a couple of different people, came over to the pen, and spoke to me in English and about the bull and appreciated the gift. I gave him a quick summary about how the bull could help, and he thought that was a great gift. Then he stepped away to the microphone and to take questions from the reporters. And when he answered the questions, he did it in Chinese through an interpreter. Now, minutes before, he'd spoken perfect English with me one-on-one. And so I asked someone about that, and they said, well, when you work through an interpreter, you always have time to think about your answer, and you can actually converse about how you're going to answer the question without actually giving an answer. Instead of, if you do it in English, you might actually use a wrong phrase or something like that. And so I thought that was kind of odd. The other thing that I did that my family really appreciated, once I had spoken to Premier, I was supposed to step back to a different spot on the farm. And I thought, you know what, this is my one chance to be on the WGN News out of Chicago. So instead of stepping back, I stood right next to the Premier, and that night on the WGN News, I was right there live in color on the TV. Not any part of our discussion, but a little old university professor from Muhammad made it to the big news.
Great. Wanted to talk a little bit more about how the cattle industry in particular has evolved over the years. And we were talking when we're not on camera about the various different hybrids that have been involved with that. Can you talk about the last 50 or 60 years of the kind of cattle that we saw 60 years on the farm versus what we see today?
You bet. And I hope I don't get too long, because this is a topic I spend my whole career about like that. But we raised cattle through the 40s and 50s and early 60s that weren't very big. They had tremendously high meat quality. We were feeding them a lot of corn and selling them with an inch of fat, or more than an inch of fat on them. Now, that makes steaks that are really juicy and flavorful. But in the 60s, we decided that we needed cattle to be leaner. We needed to make our meat products with less fat on them. You know, society changed. We became way more health conscious. And we found out that cattle that are leaner and hogs that are leaner would grow faster. And when they start to fatten, they actually grow slower. It takes twice the amount of feed to put on a pound of fat as it does a pound of muscle. And so it's not as efficient to grow animals when they're getting fat. I actually got to the university at the peak of the type change. We went from cattle, we used to call them belt buckle cattle. Pictures of me showing animals that at 2 years of age would weigh 900 pounds and be about waist high. But in the late 60s, people started to look other sources for breeds of cattle, and we went to what we called exotic breeds. The word exotic means different from. And we wanted something different that was from our traditional Angus, Hereford, Shorthorn cattle that had come from Great Britain 200 years ago. So we went to continental Europe and found breeds of cattle like Charolais, a big all-white breed, and Simmental, and Maine Anjou, and Chiania, breeds that had been used partly as draft animals and partly for milk production or a beef dairy cross, but they were much larger than American breeds of cattle. And we brought them to America. And I remember when I was on our judging team at the university, I saw the first half-blood Chiania. And Chiania was an Italian breed that were about over 6 foot at the withers and weighing 3,000 pounds. And I thought, this is the biggest beef animal I'd ever seen, and it's the answer to all the problems we have in America. Now, that's an interesting thought process, because I was started on my PhD research, and my research was, what is the composition of beef animals when they're half these continental European breeds and half the traditional American breeds? And the quick summary of it is, they're just a lot less fat. Most animals would only be 2/10, 3/10, 4/10 of an inch of fat instead of an inch or an inch and a half of fat. Instead of weighing 900 pounds at 2 years of age, they would weigh 1,500 pounds. And we improved them since then to where they'll weigh 1,300 pounds at a year of age with the proper amount of fat on them. So I was right at the heart of that evolution of type change, from little ones to big ones. Now, if you saw pictures of the cattle I judged, when I was showing in the late 60s, they were about waist high. When I judged my first national show at Oklahoma City in 1984, I couldn't see over the back of the animal. So I was one of those darn university guys that, what the heck are they choosing? Because we went from little old fat ones to great big ones. Now, it wasn't without cost. When we made cattle bigger, all of a sudden we had some calving problems. You know, if a cow's going to be big later in life, they start bigger. And so cows had trouble giving birth to these. A man who's used to feeding a 1,000-pound beef cow, now he's feeding 1,400-pound beef cows, has to buy more feed. Well, buying more feed was okay if your calves weighed 600 at weaning versus 400 at weaning. But if you lost a few dead calves, you spent a lot more for feed cost, maybe the benefits didn't totally offset all the extra costs. And so in my career, I've gone from helping evolve from the little dumpy fat ones to the biggest cattle to applying some economics and typical management till we have moderated. And we've kind of come from little to huge back to moderate. And then among the moderate population, we've actually selected for more growth and efficiency within moderate-sized cattle.
How about the flavor of the meat, the quality of the meat?
The beef cattle industry has always been a challenge because we sell a high-quality product. Not that other meats aren't high quality, but people pay a premium, have always paid a premium for beef because they like the taste. When you think of beef, you think of the steakhouse. Now, we've been enormously successful in the beef industry because half of our product is ground up as hamburger, and the ultimate fast food chains are McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger, all those places that sell hamburgers. So we have a great outlet for the lower quality meats and the steakhouses for the top quality meats. For pork and poultry, we typically market those animals when they start to get fat because they're marketed at young ages. Pork are marketed at 4 months of age or 5 months of age. And so they're young, they're tender, and the meat will be juicy, and you just don't want it to get too fat. Now, cattle we sell between a year of age and, say, 18 months of age. In the last 10 years, we've gone from the average market animal age of 2 years of age down to about 14 months of age by selecting lines of cattle, genetics where cattle will actually grow faster, and feeding them diets and rations that are in tune with these superior growth genetics. Now, one of the things people don't know about beef, we could sell beef totally lean tomorrow. If the public said all we want from beef is an extremely lean product, we could market it tomorrow. But we feed cattle, we typically raise beef and feed them on high energy diets till they start to fatten a little bit to put extra marbling, the fat, the juice, the flavor in the meat, because the American public still demands way by far a flavorful meat product. Now, if that changes, we hear about lean diets, we hear about changes in diets, we can adapt to that pretty fast. Maybe now with $7, $8, $10 corn, we're going to have to change. And it's like all American food products. If you take the fat out of the product, you lose a little bit of taste. Taste that we perceive, the juiciness of flavor, comes from fat.
Well, you led right into my next question then. What is the impact of these much higher grain prices now on the cattle industry?
I don't know in my lifetime if I've ever been more afraid for the cattle industry and all the food animal production industries. Large feedlots, large swine facilities, the large poultry facilities were always based around $2 corn. And if you think back from about 2002 back to 1945, corn was always $2. Now, we've raised a lot more corn, and in drought years we might have corn at $2.80 or $3, but most years $2 to $2.50. And so the economy of those livestock industry was based on very affordable, low-price feed costs. And now we've taken feed costs, 400% higher. And so you have an economy in swine, poultry, and beef that are based on cheap corn, that now corn is not cheap. Now, food prices are higher. Food prices aren't necessarily higher because corn is higher. It's because the labor cost, fuel delivery cost, packaging cost, marketing, all those costs. You know, the corn price affects the producer's profits, not so much the price that's in the store. I mean, the producers just can't say, I need to have a higher price, because the market for meat is based on supply and demand. And the industry adage is, if you don't sell it, you smell it. So if you raise too much meat and you can't get rid of it, then it's a product. It's a perishable product. Now,
which was the problem a few years ago with swine, especially.
Especially swine. And right now, in our industry, we worry about two things: high price feed costs to produce animals, and high price food costs. Will the public actually stop buying as much food or as much meat? You know, meat is kind of a luxury item. Let me give you an example that I worry about. I go to the store last week, and the price I pay for 2 fillets to cook on the grill is the same as I can buy a whole pork loin. So will I buy 2 fillets, or will I buy the whole pork loin, which is 3 or 4 dinners? Well, I buy the fillets, but that's just because I'm going to do that. But you know, we can see those kind of decisions being made. The reality is, if you've got grass and you've got a few cows and you don't have any alternative for that grass, cattle are still a viable income. But if you're a large Western feedlot where you have 20, 40, 50, 100,000 animals, and you're feeding them now $7, $8 corn versus $2.50 corn or $3 corn, you've got some production costs, and there's a real concern: can you survive? That's a question. I mean, I worry that the whole thing could just break down because of feed costs.
But don't you have at the same time a growing market for a lot of this beef overseas? I mean, some of these new economies, China and India, for China especially, as they're getting more, getting richer, they're developing a taste for meat that they never had before.
Historically, when countries become more economically developed, one of the first things they do is buy more meat products. I mean, meat can be part of any healthy diet. It has the same amino acid profile as human body does, so it's great as a protein source. In all the micro minerals, the magnesium, the B vitamins, and on, you know, meat's fit. What you don't need to do is have a daily diet of fat bacon and over-fat steaks that are 18 ounces. I mean, you can consume too much. I think the diet issues in America are mostly we consume too much, and we don't eat enough different choices of food. But you're right about that. The problem in international markets is probably based around the political economic environment. It's interesting, when I traveled in Australia last year giving seminars, 2 or 3 times they asked me, how did the American cattlemen develop such a powerful political lobby in Washington? And I said, the American cattlemen have no voice in Washington. We're one of the lowest rungs of the ladder in Washington. But to an Australian who export 70% of their beef, any beef we export interferes with their market. And so, but they thought we were exporting. Well, for the Japanese market is a huge market for American beef. The Korean market, if we get it open up, is a huge market. Economies that have money, they're willing to pay for high beef prices. So they are. We figure that if the average market beef animal today is worth about $1 a pound, about $10 of that, or 10 cents of that dollar a pound is due to export markets. And if we keep growing it, it has a huge impact on the market. So, but the decisions aren't necessarily made to benefit the animal producer. It's whether we import cars or export cars. We import radios or export radios. I think there's a lot of other items that are higher up on the decision part of that rather than just agricultural products.
But I still would think there's a tremendous potential for growth in some of those markets, especially in Asia.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got our fingers crossed that we can get those markets open, and because they are direct impact to the prices that producers can receive.
Well, let's change gears just a little bit, but it's affecting the market, I think. I wanted to talk to you about animal growth hormones, technologies in that respect, and where the United States is on that right now, where the university would be on that.
Yeah. Universities are about discovery. Universities have always been about measuring products and their benefits. When we talk about research, one of the issues we want to talk about here in a moment is how much animal research is benefiting humans. In fact, a lot of our animal science research is actually delves into human medicine. But as far as feed additives or implants or compounds that we add to animals to enhance growth, they're like most products. I think there's a public awareness. And, you know, a lot of the problems we have with things we do in agriculture is the public has no connection to agriculture. They have no idea what production of agriculture is. They don't understand the process. Even our students are basically of that type when they enter animal sciences. But we have compounds that are hormone-like compounds that we give to beef animals or dairy animals. We can give what we call beta antagonists to swine that actually work in the animal's body to change the body processes to produce less fat and more muscle. Now, these are not compounds that are like the steroid scare, and not compounds that actually show up in the meat product or the milk product that consumers have. They're compounds that actually alter body function that then results in more lean and less fat tissue. And so it makes the animal more efficient, 10-12% more efficient in growth as far as the food they use and the product they develop. Constantly we test these products. The USDA or the FDA always tests these products to make sure there's no detectable any residue or anything that would be harmful. And so the products are safe. I just dealt with an issue last week because about BST in milk. Now, BST is bovine somatotrophin. There's an analog of BST that's similar to human growth hormone. And so we deal with issues where the public reads an article that says, oh my God, they're giving cows human growth hormone. I'm going to get it when I drink the milk. It's going to make my kids grow up with large heads or too much hair on their body or something like that. And actually what happens is milk glands in humans and animals are developed as a part of circulating human growth hormone. Bovine somatotrophin is a different analog of human growth hormone. If we give dairy cows this BST, they actually will develop more mammary glands and so they'll have more mammary gland tissue, produce more milk. Now, if you take a sample of milk this week, last week, 25 years ago, it will have a little bit of this BST in it. It always has because it's a byproduct of mammary tissue. A cow that's been injected with BST that produces 7-8% more milk, in her milk, the amount of circulating the amount of BST is the same as the cow that doesn't have an injection of it. So as a dairy farmer, if you use a compound that enhances the amount of milk 6, 7, 8%, where the milk doesn't have any residue, doesn't change what the milk's made of, it seems like a reasonable compound to use. We use the same thing in cattle where we have estrogen-like compounds that result in the body producing more lean tissue. And the estrogen residue in a normal meat cut is the same as it is in a non-implanted animal. Now, the estrogen in a normal meat cut is less by about 1,000-fold than the estrogen in a spinach salad. But we have groups that say, oh, they're giving these compounds, and I don't believe the FDA because I think there's more estrogen in there because young girls start reaching puberty sooner and they ate meat. Well, that's a scenario that you can create. That's a scenario that on the internet, could spread like wildfire in today's times, but it's a scenario that's not true based on science. So our challenge as scientists, when we test products, we have absolute responsibility. The federal government puts an enormous amount of testing through their agency of any of these compounds that private industry would develop. And so we use compounds that enhance product development, and we're very assured that we do it safely.
There are places in the world where there are other things that are being used that does affect the human population down the road as well? I don't
think so, but the problem is we don't know. We don't know the regulatory, the inspection, the amount of use. Any producer could take one of these compounds and misuse it.
Well, let me take something right out of these flies are getting persistent
now.
But right out of the front page, we're about a week or two away from the China Olympics to begin. And now American athletes are afraid to eat food in China because they're afraid that they might test positive for steroids.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that, I think, and I'm not familiar with that exact article, but we have, let's use an example of some of the herbal teas, like green teas. And this is not an area where I'm an expert in. But there was a craze where we thought if we take some of these herbs as medicine, or will give us antioxidants and prevent us from getting cancer or do things. Because people say, oh, so-and-so did this and their blood pressure went down and things like that. But these items are not tested or approved for medical purposes. But there became kind of cult use of a lot of these different compounds. And I think cultures like the Chinese, we've all read historically, they use different plants and compounds to treat diseases and ailments. And so, but nobody's documented with extensive testing what the results could be. And all the results that we have on our compounds go through a 5, 6, 7 year testing. Now in our society, we have issues like should we use different kinds of compounds? Why does it take so long to develop these compounds? Why does medical research take so long to get a compound? That's because, we read about it's approved, it looks like it'll fight cancer. We'll let you know in 8 years after we've tested on enormous human populations and gone through enough periods to know the after effect. I mean, we've set up this to make sure there's no quick application and there's a very thorough testing. But you're right, in the rest of the world where we don't know their testing procedures, absolutely, there could be some compounds that would cause reactions that we're not sure of.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that American beef industry has had lately is with some of the diseases, and I'm thinking especially of mad cow disease,
Yeah.
but there are others as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about mad cow disease and that impact, not just from a pathological sense,
Sure.
but from the marketing
Sure.
side as well?
Let's start real quickly. BSE, bovine spongiod encephalopathy. We like to say BSE instead of mad cow because mad cow creates that bad connotation. But it's an infection into the nervous organ. Now, it's not a virus. It's not a bacteria. It's caused from a mutated protein. And if you think about a protein that takes an abnormal shape that ends up in the brain, and because of this abnormal shape, other proteins will attach to it. What it does in the simplest form, it creates space then between nerve endings in the brain. And so you get malfunction of the nervous system. And they call it mad cow because a cow that had this disease typically be an animal that couldn't stand or was real shaky, or her head would move side to side, and it was neurological malfunction. So it's not something like an infection or a bacteria you would get. You would have to actually eat contaminated nervous system tissue from an animal with the disease to get this disease. Now, BSE is similar to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease that we see in humans that occurs as a mutated protein in about 1 in a million in the population. Creutzfeldt-Jakob was in one of the South Pacific islands, had a population that suffered from the disease, but they were cannibalistic. They ate the brains of humans. And so they spread the disease because they ate nervous tissue that way. Well, the BSE mad cow kind of was an outbreak that took place primarily in England. And they got it from cows who had eaten contaminated feed that contained ingredients from animals who had been harvested, and their products went back into the feed. Now let's start at the beginning of that chain. One of the byproducts when you harvest animals is you have some meat and bone meal and blood meal that's left over that used to be mixed together and used as a protein supplement to animals. And so some of the contaminated nervous tissue got in to this feed in a certain locale, and it developed in these mutated proteins in cattle in Great Britain. And over a course of years, it got to be a lot of animals with the mutated protein. Some passed on from generation to others, some didn't. And it took them about 5 or 6 years when they had these odd animals to really identify that they were having an epidemic. And I think at its peak, about 1,700 lives were lost due to BSE. Because they were slow in making changes, that trickled on, and last year in the world we had 3 deaths due to BSE. And I often think about how many people died on our highways last weekend. But we're at a zero tolerance level. We want no deaths due to this problem. Well, in the United States, we 10 years ago quit feeding any animal products in animal feed, which should eliminate the problem. The disease typically animals wouldn't live, the disease would show itself when the animal is 5 to 8 years old. And so we've been 10 years past that. We've never imported animals now from England since this all started. And in Canada, you know, for a while we didn't import from Canada. Now we only import meat from Canada when they can document the animals come from tested and cleared. Canada, because they had a few identified cases, actually reduced their whole beef population by 80%. And they're now rebuilding it through herds of animals that have detailed testing. We increased our testing, random testing of animals by about tenfold in this country. And any animal that has any signs of being suspect like this is eliminated from the food chain. So we have an extensive testing period system. Harvard did a test on this and thought our chances of getting BSE or mad cow disease from human beef, American beef by Americans, was equal to the random 1 in a million that occurs in humans. So we think we have a safe food supply. Now, it has been a challenge internationally to convince the rest of the world that our beef is safe. Japan particularly has been kind of doing it. We have a rule now, the beef we export to Japan comes from animals that are 20 months old or younger, which the illness, the mad cow disease, never professes itself, never becomes a problem until the animals are 5, 6, 7 years old. So we think we have a really safe product. We're working really hard to make sure we test. Nothing would be more deflating to our economy in the beef industry to have an outbreak of that.
I understood that cultures like China and Korea, or not China and Korea, Japan and Korea, because they're eating more raw beef products, that was one of their concerns?
Well, yeah, it is a concern, but there's no validity to that. I mean, one of the other things we fight in the beef industry is E. coli contamination. E. coli, you know, in my beef class, I serve them burgers on the first day. The class is 11 in the morning. They like burgers. And about 10 minutes into it, I say, well, by the way, half of you are eating hamburgers from E. coli contaminated beef. And all the eating stops in the room. And I've explained to them that if you cook beef to 158 degrees, E. coli is dead. So I guarantee them they're cooked that well, and it's safe. But you think they'll start eating? Not a chance. And so, you know, but hamburger is mixed and packaged, and so it's exposed to all the toxins that are in the air, all the bacteria and those kind of problems. So we fight those. We have the best food inspection service in the world. I mean, if you ever traveled internationally, you're amazed at the way they present some of their food, particularly these developing countries and outdoor markets. But we have a society that wants zero tolerance. And I don't think the public really is concerned when they go to a store about the quality of their food and the safety of their food. But they better cook meat to a safe temperature, and they better wash their hands, and they better wash their fruit and food products before they prepare it. I mean, there's simple, basic hygiene that needs to occur.
I want to ask you just one more question before we begin to walk around and see some of the things up close that you've been working with. And that question is about the tracking of beef. And I think you had mentioned before there was some resistance among American beef producers to do that.
We have a national program to identify every animal individually and also to identify every premise that is raising food animals. I personally am a person that's totally in favor of that. If we're raising a food product, we shouldn't be afraid to document that we're doing it in a wholesome, safe fashion, which we do. But there is a different opinion among agriculture and conservative people out there. I don't want Big Brother watching me. I don't want the federal government knowing everything about me and everything and do this. And while they're doing it in a safe, wholesome practice, there's a resistance until it's mandatory to do that voluntarily. Though we're pushing it and we're seeing progress in that. Australia and some other countries in the world require mandatory individual animal ID, and they laugh at us because we don't do it, because it allows them into international markets with more ease because they can document every animal, where they came from, and track it if there ever is a safety problem. So we're going to get to that. But again, it's a political feeling. I don't want the government to know too much about me.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and break, and we'll start up again and kind of take a walk around the round barn and then elsewhere as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks you, Doug.